Well, welcome back, class. This is the second video of 3 pertaining to our final project in EDUC 6915. And this specifically is section 2, which is about the frameworks for evaluating and applying exemplary teaching to classroom practice and using the Utah Effective Teaching Standards. Okay, so in section 1 of our final project and plan, we set the stage. We defined exemplary teaching and then exemplary teaching in the 21st century. How does exemplary teaching, as compared to teaching that is not exemplary, how is that defined? And then exemplary teaching in the 21st century as compared to teaching in the 20th century or the 19th or the 18th century. So we laid out all those definitions and the historical context of how public schools have historically not promoted educational equity, even though that has been one of the major purposes of why public schools were established. They were established to be a system, an institution, an important social space or venue where citizens in this republic that is the United States of America would come together from all different backgrounds, and the playing field would be leveled so that no matter what your background was, race, class, gender, primary language, religion, whatever it was, the playing ground, the playing field would be leveled, and education would be the means of leveling that. That's a lovely idea. Unfortunately, education as the great equalizer hasn't worked out that way yet. Our educational pipelines have still been leaking in public schools and in higher education. You see the disparities. For example, if you look at populations across the United States in higher ed, at universities and colleges, you will find that consistently across the United States, the populations are overwhelmingly white. And if you flip it and you take a look at the prison and penal system, you will see the inverse. You will see overwhelmingly that you've got minoritized populations in the penal system, incarcerated, and so on. So you can see that our society still has some big disparities, and it cannot possibly be that people of color just are more likely to commit crime, right? So if you have, for example, African Americans making up about 13% of the total US population, and then they're making up what, 60-70% of prison populations, the ratios are really off. Clearly something is happening there. Is it really possible that white people are overwhelmingly smarter than other groups and hence they go to college? No, right? So we see those disparities, and K-12 schools were supposed to and were intended in the common schooling movement to be functioning in society as a great equalizer. And as teachers, that's our goal. We're there to educate every child. If we were in private school, we might be able to say, yes, I'll take you, but I won't take you. But in public school, it means public. It means that every child that walks through our door, we have an obligation as teachers to teach them. And they should all get a quality education, no matter what their background is. And I know that's why I went into teaching, and I know that that's why you went into teaching as well, to be a dream keeper. So that was our background in section 1. In section 2, we're going to actually use these tools to apply to classrooms, and not only just classrooms in general, but eventually to our own classrooms. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you, and I want to take a look again at our assignments. I went to assignments in our Canvas course, and I clicked section 2 draft. And so now we're writing the second part of our big final project plan for this course. Okay, so in this one, we are going to discuss and elaborate on how we know when we are or are not looking at teaching that is exemplary. How do we know that? We have to be able to measure and assess the teaching we are looking at and evaluate that teaching to determine whether or not the teaching we are observing is exemplary or not, right? We just can't just guess. It feels like it's exemplary. No, we actually have to have standards and measures to decide, to be able to evaluate and conclude whether it's exemplary. So we're going to use frameworks as our lenses to make those decisions, those evaluations, to determine whether we are observing exemplary teaching or not. There are many different frameworks which are useful for evaluating teaching. The main thing, though, when we're picking frameworks is they must address those 3 principles. High levels of academic achievement, high levels of cultural competence, and then the tricky one, the one that is kind of the linchpin, high levels of criticality, that socio-historical awareness of patterns of inequities based on various social differences, whether it's gender, primary language, race, etc. Okay, so as we talked about before, frameworks are made up of guiding principles, and these guiding principles are elements of frameworks used to determine whether or not the teaching is exemplary. So just like I go out into schools and I observe student teachers, and I make evaluations of what I see them doing, how they interact with their students, what's the curriculum that they present, how effective are their teaching practices, their instructional strategies, how do they assess. So I'm using a particular lens to look through the world at their teaching world to decide, is this good teaching? Is this not good teaching? Is this exemplary? And so that's the idea that we're working on with section 2. For our projects, for our final plan and project, you only need to choose one of the frameworks to put into your section 2 paper. But I want you to be able to compare and contrast the 3 frameworks so that you can decide, what are the 3 and then which one is the best one for you. You cannot choose one unless you've looked at all of them. Okay, so these are the 3 that you have to choose from. We're going to use option 1 is Dr. Dr. Hammond's Ready for Rigor framework. Option 2 is Dr. Timon's 8 Enduring Principles of Learning framework. And option 3 is Dr. Goldie Muhammad's Historically Responsive Literacy Model. Okay, so we'll go over those and talk, and I'll show you how to compare and contrast them. Okay, so section 2 is focusing on selecting one of those frameworks, but you have to compare and contrast them to be able to make an informed choice about which one you want to use for your classroom. Then you're going to apply it to your classroom and make a plan based on how you evaluated your classroom using that framework. And you're going to, in your paper, discuss the elements of the selected framework. And you're also going to introduce the Utah Effective Teachers Standards and core curriculum from your teaching level. So, and those three things have to line up. Your frameworks that you chose from these three here, the elements of whichever one that you chose has to line up with the Utah Effective Teaching Standards and the core curriculum for your content area. If you're an elementary teacher, or if you're a secondary teacher and you're a special discipline, like maybe history or English, maybe you're special education, maybe you are a PE teacher, whatever your content area is, you have a particular part of the core curriculum that you are responsible for. Okay, so I am going to show you how to compare and contrast those. And then again, this is not a checklist in this outline of the instruction. Just look at it holistically as these are the things that I'm looking for in this section. So I have pulled up, let me see if I can stop sharing my screen here. Well, actually, I will keep my screen shared, but I want to show you something else. Okay, all right. So what I want to show you here is how I compare and contrast the different frameworks. Okay, so I'm making a grid here, and I'll fill some of them in, and then I think you'll see how the process goes. So I started out here on this left side of our chart with the three principles that we know are in every single exemplary teacher's approach to successful teaching and learning for all learners, especially for the learners that other teachers continue to fail with. And those three principles, as you probably are tired of hearing about right now, but they should become automatic in your brain. Okay, so the first one is high levels of academic achievement. That's the first principle. The second principle is high levels of cultural competence, that ability to walk in both worlds. I can be Latinx and successful in school. I can be transgender and successful in school, and so on. I have to do both. And if I have to as your student, you have to as my teacher. Okay. And then the third one is the high levels of socio-historical awareness of inequities, or where it's also referred to as criticality or the so what factor. Okay, and of course, this is the one that always is the tricky one. It's the one that absolutely must be in there. It's kind of a given for academic achievement, even somewhat of a given for cultural competence, although oftentimes the idea is that students must conform to the school culture rather than crafting the school culture into where the learners are. Start with the learner, not the lesson plan, and then help them to develop what they need to know and their skills so that they can be full participants in our society. So these two are a little bit oftentimes more understandable for many people. This third one is the one that often stumps teachers. And this is the one, if it is not there, you do not have exemplary teaching. Okay, so let's look at Dr. Mohammed's approach, her framework that she uses to tell us what to look for in our classrooms to see if we have exemplary teaching. She's developed a model called historically responsive literacy. So this document is in it's in our modules. And So I pulled that up. You have the same document as well. And I just scrolled down a little bit. This is what it looks like. It's actually an interview that somebody did with Dr. Muhammad. So you can read through this top part, but I really wanted you to focus on these two clarifications for her model, because a lot of times people will say, but I'm not a literacy teacher. And so how is this useful for me? And she addresses that. Um, I have her book. I really like it. I don't see it right close at hand right now, but she also has a brand new book that just came out, which I think this one is very I started reading it and I'm loving it. So her previous one, where she lays out this framework, is a book that looks like this, but it's blue. I don't see mine right handy. But this little article is just short, and it has the condensed version of what she's talking about. So she says, in the past, historically, literacy was synonymous with education. It didn't mean just like putting sounds together like phonics and being able to put words into a sentence and create meaning. That's often how we define literacy now. But it used to be, if you were a literate person, it means you were educated. You had like a liberal education, and you could use your broad general education, your liberal education, to troubleshoot and problem solve, because you were drawing on knowledge from all disciplines. And that's the notion of literacy that she is using. Okay. So she says, although I name literacy, these four pursuits can be used and layered with math, science, language arts, social studies, physical education, in other words, everything. Okay. It's not just a framework for English language learners or literacy, as in reading teachers, language arts teachers. She says that the historically responsive literacy framework is actually for all of us. Okay, so what are her four elements? She says it's identity, who you are, like as a woman, as someone who identifies as transgender, maybe female to male. It could be that you identify as Black. It could be that you identify as Muslim, whatever that would be, that matters. Okay, so identity would be the first factor. The second factor is skills, that we do need to have skills. And so, but it can't be just skills. It has to be skills in a context. So if we know how to decode words, the reason that we have decoding words is because we're trying to understand the world, right? So it's not just skill and drill, but skills that we develop for a reason. Okay, so she says that a way of thinking, or she wants to dismantle this idea that it's kind of skill and drill. Okay, but that you do have to have some skills. I think about it like when I was teaching second and third grade, I had to teach the children how to write in cursive. And I was very particular with about how they would form their letters. And because I was trying to develop a skill with them, they needed like a toolbox. And then as they became more sophisticated, they developed their own style. And I think musicians kind of know this too. Like you need some basic skills, and then you develop and use those skills to be very creative, to communicate, and to act in your world. So that's kind of the idea of skills. So in math, it can be learning equations, You need all of these kind of basic skills. So read this article. So skills and then intellect. Here, what does she mean about intellect? She says, I'm pushing the ideal of intellectualism, of treating young people as if they're scholars, intellectuals, and thinkers. And they are. This is the world that they are inheriting. And they are far more capable. Even with kindergartners, I think people often underestimate how bright the children are and how much they are aware of that. We're not aware that they are aware of it. So by thinking about them as knowledge seekers and active agents in their world, okay? And I love how she says, what does this look like in the classroom? She does that for all four of them. How does my teaching and learning helps teach students new knowledge and concepts, new histories, new people, new places? So she's kind of talking about like how great poetry will do this for you. I love literature and poetry because often a short story or a poem will contain in a very small space what volumes of textbooks are trying to explicate. And so that's what she's talking about. And great poetry will do this sort of where it will take us, it's like freedom dreams. It will take you to new places. This is new. None of us know everything. None of us have experienced everything. And so great poetry will take us to new places. It'll transport us to new places. It will also great poetry will also kind of put in front of us like some of the horrors of the human experience. Some things about the human experience are very beautiful, but at the same time, on the flip side of that, we have like the Holocaust. We have where the westward movement in the United States was westward for some people. It was actually the Trail of Tears was eastward. And so for some people, it was eastward. And some people who were going westward weren't going because they wanted to, but they were taken along as enslaved people. So we have like this flip side also. We have the United States, having these ideals of freedom, and yet we have very much this history of unfreedom with our, foundation of stolen labor, stolen land, and so on. So great poetry will take us to new, beautiful places we can learn about, but it will also help us to confront some of these challenging issues that are very real in our world. And by doing that, taking us to new places, and by helping us to look at and really engage the uglier sides, the horrors of our world and human experience and human history, then we can use those two sides, and we can begin imagining a different reality and imagine creating and collaborating with others to create a more inclusive, a more humanizing space and community and world. And young people are the ones who are inheriting this world, and they come with many new exciting ideas and energies and ways of looking at the world, and our teaching can help to set that free. So that's kind of the idea here behind intellectualism. And then criticality here, this is much more than analytical thinking where we're analyzing and deep thinking. It's about understanding unequal power relations. Like you understand that as the student, you are in a more vulnerable position than I am as your instructor, because my say is going to go farther than yours is, even though you're adults, right? And so just the sheer positioning of you as student, as an idea, puts you in a very vulnerable place. And it also puts me in a place where I have to be super careful about how I interact with you, that I do not do anything to treat you in an it way, or minimize your opportunities, or silence your gifts, or your uh, stories that you can share with us. Okay, so how does my teaching and learning help students to understand power, equity, anti-racism, anti-oppression? So she talks about that. Okay, so criticality, intellect, skills, and identity. How can we put those into this chart over here then? So we're comparing and contrasting our framework. So maybe we could put skills right here. Her element of skills would go right there. Now you may disagree with me, and you may say, no, I want it to be over here in cultural competence. I would argue, well, I can see that you could make the case for that, because you do need certain skills to be able to be culturally competent. So, whatever your rationale is, you're trying to see how it compares, how it matches up with these three elements over here. And definitely, of course, criticality, that is Dr. Hammond's word, and it's the ability to analyze, to really to identify, understand, and then unpack or work against inequities. Okay, so students should know that they have power just like you do. So one person, we can say, what is in my sphere of influence? I can't do everything, but I can do something. And even the children can. There's always something that maybe they feel that that the way that they are not allowed to use certain PE equipment is, in their world, they see that as unfair. How can the teachers have snacks in the classroom, but the children cannot? So, everybody has a voice and an ability to do something, no matter if it's just us individually or partnering up with a friend, with a colleague, and so on. And so learners can do that too. And there's many examples of that. You may have seen this book. This book here is a book that has many examples of that. And there's quite a few others if you look at them. And I know I get, I'm on many news letters and blog lists where I get receive emails regularly, which hand me all kinds of examples of that constantly. Okay, so criticality, skills, and maybe we could put intellect is also up here. That might be there. And then let me see, we're missing one of our skills. Oh, identity. Identity is the other one. Okay, so I've got to be able to walk in both worlds. And of course, I'm just putting the words right here, but the definitions and elaboration of that, like I did here, you would want to, what does Mohammed mean by identity here? So you'd want to put a little definition right here with both of these as well. And so you can see that Mohammed's framework here is linking up with, we can make the case for not a straw man argument where it's like that's kind of a long stretch, but we can actually make the case that Mohammed's framework does have these elements that fit with the three main principles of culturally responsive exemplary teaching. So when we look into the classroom, if I came to observe your classroom and I was using Mohammed's framework, I would be looking for what kind of skills are you promoting? What kind of intellect are you developing? How are you incorporating students' identities in there? And what are you doing in your lessons and your interactions with the learners where you're promoting criticality? Okay, so that's one framework, okay? And then with, we're gonna do the same thing here with, let me see, I'm trying to see the, with enduring principles. Okay, let me see if you can see this side by side. Okay, now this is based on social constructivism, which I'm sure you've heard about that as a learning theory, where you have Vygotsky and this idea of proximal zone of development. And so how does this framework fit with the three principles identified by Dr. Ladson Billings? Where would we put them? Okay, the first one is joint productive activity. And in this document, which you do have as well, you will see that there's a definition laid out of each one. So I'm not going to take the time to go through that with you. That you can do on your own. But I'll just tell you that joint productive activity, if you think about zone of proximal development, it means that we're creating something together. It can be students creating something, student and student in maybe group work, but people are working together to create something, okay? And it doesn't have to be like a project. It can be completing something, coming up with a list of women that are not often acknowledged during Women's History Month. It can be some task that they're working on together, or it can be something that you as the teacher are working to create and actually produce something with the students or a student. So like a lot of times when I was teaching third grade, we would write a story together about our experience when we went to the panaderia, when we went to the bakery. And so together we would write a story that was about our experiences. So that would be joint productive activity. And then the second one here, the language and literacy development, if you've ever learned another language, you know that kind of just kind of basic interpersonal skills, that those are like, hi, how you doing, kind of small talk. But then if you're going to go into the disciplines and like you work in, have a conversation about math, you have a very specialized a vocabulary and way of talking. Like in science, you have words like evidence. So you might have a word like experiment, hypothesis, think words like that. And so those are particular ways of speaking and vocabulary that are specific to different areas in the curriculum, okay? And then contextualizing, that's like connecting school to students' lives. So if I was doing a lesson on sickle cell anemia and I'm in southern Utah rather than lower Alabama, in lower Alabama, it might be real easy to connect my lesson on sickle cell anemia to my students because a lot of my students are African American. And so that is something that sickle cell anemia pops up a lot in that population. They're often pretty familiar with it. But maybe in my class that I'm teaching at Parowan High School in Iron County in southern Utah, I might not have people who have had much exposure to or any knowledge of sickle cell anemia. So how am I going to hook them into, get them interested in learning about sickle cell anemia and why it matters to them? Okay, so that's what it means to contextualize it. And then you don't want activities to be lower on Bloom's taxonomy. Now, sometimes you have to, like when you're just starting a unit or something, and you need to have just like, do they have these basic multiplication facts or whatever? And so they might be low level, but not all of your lessons should be like fill in the blank or call in response, like what does genetics mean? And then they give you an answer, that kind of call it out, and then they respond and spit it back to you. That's kind of lower level. You want where they have to actually use complex thinking. So not every lesson will you have every one of these but that's what you're shooting for. Now remember, this is Timon's framework and not Mohammed's. Okay, it's a little more itemized. You've got, instead of 4 elements, you've got 8 here, 8 principles. And so you got, for principle 5, you have instructional conversation. That reminds me of when my children were little and I was teaching them how to make a bed. And so I would say, I would use the conversation. I would say, okay, now let's pull the covers up, straighten out the wrinkles, make sure that you don't have more on this side as compared to this side. So when you use teaching through conversation, you're like doing talk alouds, you're coaching them through that. Okay, and you can do that with the whole class or with individuals, small groups, so on. Principle 6 is that critical stance here, where, for example, when I brought my kindergartners to the dentist's office for our community helpers unit, and we were talking with the dentist and his assistant, and one of my little kindergartners, a little girl, said, teacher, why are all the dentist boys and all the helpers girls? And so here you had a 6-year-old doing a very astute gender analysis. And so, we would, talk about that sort of thing right here. Children are they ask questions about the world around them. And so we are not pretending that we don't see them, but we actually acknowledge it. If we're talking about Mr. Policeman is our friend, that may not be something that the children have seen in their neighborhood. So they might think, well, teacher lies, or we can't trust teacher because that's certainly not okay. And so, we can say, yes, sometimes things do happen where it does seem like, are you sure you're my friend? We might question that. So we take a critical stance with that. And principle 7, we're learning through observation. This is really important too, where sometimes it's like you are showing them using manipulatives, and before they're actually doing it, they see the big picture, they see how it's done, and it's modeled for them. Even with college students, I do try to do that as well. Whatever behavior I want from my students, I try to model and then make that explicit to them. And then principle 8 is student-directed activity. Some parts of learning should be where learners are making choices about what they want to do. And you may have said, well, this is the learning objective, but, let them come up with some sort of a final project. I could have done that with you for this final project, right? So I went against that in the sense that I thought we have 7 weeks, and so we kind of need to know from day one where we're going. So so those are the 8 principles in TMONTS. So now we can start thinking about, okay, where do they go on here? Well, we can say principle 6 is going to go right down here, right? Principle 6. And that was the critical stance. Okay. And then what else do we have? We could put principle 1. We could put that up here, right? Principle 1, joint productive activity, and we'd have to give a little rationale for that. I would say that, a lot of times, if you're working with the children or having the children work together to produce something, they are going to be analyzing, applying, creating. They're going to automatically be doing a lot more of that Bloom's taxonomy of higher order thinking if they have to produce something. And then let's see, maybe challenging activities, we could put that over here. Principle 4 as well, and give a little rationale for that. That, we don't, it's not just gifted and talented students that should have challenging activities and complex thinking. There's so often when I'm observing student teachers where I'm the other adult in the room and I am so bored because everything is like low level call and response. They don't have to, they can almost be mindlessly robots just spitting back what the teacher wants. It's not particularly interesting or engaging. And so I would say that to really get high levels of academic achievement, you need that kind of challenging, pushing them beyond their existing knowledge base, that zone of proximal development. I would put probably contextualizing meaning right over here. Let me see, that was principle 3. Because I'm thinking, this is where I want the students, I want their, how do their school lives match their home lives? So for example, one time I was getting my 3rd graders ready for a standardized test. And one of the concepts that we were going to be looking at or tested on was the concept of a harbor. Well, given that my students were living in Salt Lake County and they were in a semi-arid desert, we don't have harbors in Utah. And so the place that they would see a boat would be on the back of a pickup truck. So I was helping them to be able to walk in both worlds, where it's legitimate to say that a pickup or that a boat's going to be on the back of a pickup being hauled down to maybe Lake Powell, or if the water's not too low, and so on. And we can also learn about what a harbor is and where harbors are found. So we can go to new places by exploring new ideas and thinking about that. So I would put that right here. Do you see how I'm doing that? I'm taking each each principle, and I'm fitting it here, and I have a rationale that I can talk about that goes there. So that you're going to continue doing that. And the next one is you're going to keep doing that same process. Oops, that's not the right one. Hammond's ready for rigor. Okay, so this one, and she too has it described. She's only got 4 of them here, 4 elements, not 8 as Dr. Timont did. Dr. Muhammad had 4 also. These are a different 4. And you'll see, know your own cultural lens right off the bat. You know, I'm thinking, know my own cultural lens and your cultural lens, right? And so right away, I'm thinking about walking in 2 worlds. So where do these things fit in relation to the 3 main principles here? So I think you should be getting the idea with how you would fill this in and give your rationale for that. Okay. And then this next one, remember we talked about this is learning in the 21st century as compared to learning in the 20th century, where we were industrializing and now we're in this knowledge economy. And so you can see the different components here. They're in green. Where do they fit? And I'll tell you right up front, the one thing that one does not do is it does not do this third principle here, historic or high levels of socio-historical awareness, the criticality. And so it has a wonderful, wonderful job over here with these others, but it is missing this. So that's why it's not possible to use that for exemplary teaching. It's insufficient. You have to cobble something together from the others, okay? And then we're going to do the same thing here with the Utah teaching standards. Let me see if I can pull that up for you. I've got all these things open down here. Let me see. Here it is. Okay. So this document also is up for you in our modules. And you probably have seen these before because Utah teachers are evaluated on them. So standard 1 is about learners and learning, and it has the different elements under that standard. And then standard 2 is instructional design clarity. And then standard 3 is on instructional practice. And then standard 4 is classroom climate. Okay, so again, there's room in these to be able to put 2 or more in the different spaces. The main thing that you have to look for, and which is often missing, is this third one. And this is the make or break one. This criticality is the make or break one if it's addressed or not addressed in the framework. The framework will be incomplete and will not be able to address exemplary teaching if it does not have criticality. Okay, so in section 2 then, so you're going to do the same thing with these standards. And think about how this helps with accountability, in the sense that whenever a parent, a teacher, another teacher, an administrator asks you why you're doing something in your classroom, you can say, well, I am doing it because I'm addressing standard 4 and standard 2 or whatever it is. I do feel that it's a very good thing to be able to be prepared at all times, to be able to report and say, this is why I'm doing this in my classroom. So I can remember being a first year teacher, teaching second grade out in a portable. And my principal was observing my teaching. And he asked me why I had the kids doing this particular activity. He thought it was just kind of a time filler, just something, quote, fun for the kids to do. And it was fun, but I actually had an academic reason that we were doing it. I was working on this intellectualism here. And so it wasn't immediately apparent to my principal, but he invited me to be accountable for what I was doing. And I was able to give that answer. So I don't think that's a bad thing for teachers, that we are always ready to be accountable for what we do and why we do it. That's super important. So we can say, well, I am addressing innovation and technology with this. And I know that access to technology, there's a big disparity in that. And so, a lot of times learners may not know how to do this, and it's a skill that will help to address the disparities. So I can give examples of that. I can link what I'm doing to these standards here. And then, your area that you teach in, your next, you would add a column here to the right, which would say Utah State Core Curriculum. So that's going to be different in terms of, are you a kindergarten teacher? Are you a third grade teacher? Are you a high school teacher? And you will be working on different core curriculum, and you can say, well, I'm addressing this in the core, and I'm meeting Utah's effective teaching standards. And this is why it is exemplary, because I am able to say that I am doing this, or that in exemplary teaching. So that's what section 2 does, is it's linking the frameworks of exemplary teaching and the Utah State standards of effective teaching and the Utah core curriculum. Okay, so the Utah standards for effective teaching, those they are complementary with the principles of exemplary teaching, but they aren't the same. So the standards of effective teaching that Utah has developed, that is not the same as the principles of exemplary teaching in the 21st century. Do you see the difference between the two? So therefore, you've got to show how they fit and are complementary to each other. So for section 2, you're going to have a section that explains what a framework is, okay? And then you're going to have a section that talks about how you apply frameworks to the classroom, okay? So frameworks don't just exist for the heck of it, right? They are actually tools that we apply to our classroom so that we can say, yes, this is exemplary. No, that is not exemplary. And this is the reason why. So you're explaining what a framework is, and then you are talking about how it is applied to teaching to evaluate and determine what is and is not exemplary teaching. Then the next section, the third section in section 2, I should say part 3, we're still working in section 2. That's going to be where you are going to develop this chart here. You're going to take out my writing on here and put your own in here. You're going to do just like I did, where you're going to put the principle and then a little definition of it so that we know why you think it fits right there. And so you're going to finish filling this chart out and add your chart over here, which I'll put that in right now. And I'm just going to insert a column. Let's see if I can insert a column. Might not be able to do that right here, but I want you to be able to, here we go. Insert a column to the right. Okay, I need to make this a little small. Okay, and this one is going to be your Utah core curriculum. Okay, I'll fix that. But that's going to be for your grade level. So you put whatever, if you're a kindergarten teacher, whatever there. So you're going to develop this, fill this chart out, finish it out, and talk about it, explain it to the reader. Then for part 4 of section 2, you're going to tell the reader what you decided, which one you're going to use for your own classroom. So you have talked about all of them, and now you're going to make a decision. For my classroom, I'm going to use Timons because, and I'm not going to use Mohammed's or Hammond's because, so everybody's teaching fits better with one or another. You just have to make a decision, which one are you going to use? And then, so just tell your reader what you decided, and then explain why you made that choice. Okay, and that is section 2 for your paper. And then section 3, I'll make another video for you, and that one is going to be where you describe your own classroom and the context of your school and what you do. And then you're going to apply the framework that you selected to your own classroom. And then you will come up with a plan. You'll just say, well, based on my evaluation using Hammond's Ready for Rigor model, for example, you might say, I'm doing really well doing this, this, and this. My areas that I want to take next steps for in developing my own exemplary teaching are going to be X, Y, and Z. Okay, and then you'll write up a kind of a summary of the whole paper and a conclusion, and there you go. And hopefully your project is going to be very useful to you so that you can actually go ahead and start implementing the plan that you made to move your own teaching practices closer to exemplary teaching. I definitely would not say that my teaching is exemplary every time, all the time. I do have those ideals in my head where I'm trying to move that way, always trying to be a lifelong learner, but there's definitely room in my practice for a path forward. And so you're going to make that decision about your own as well. Okay, so that's section 2 with a little hint of what's coming up in section 3. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to stop recording, and thank you for listening.